This is Denmark, where they're more into rectangles than into squares. It's a nice departure. Here is France, where the arrangement is not nearly so regular, and also each pattern is separated from the next one by a dark line, which is in many cases due to hedges. So here we have not just a passion for Euclidean geometry, but also a passion for territoriality. And here is still another pattern. This place is into rectangles, but is also into up. In this place, great structures have been built vertically as well as horizontally. This is New York City. And how these stalagmites of intelligent origin ever came to be would not be apparent to us, much less why they would want to build up when there's so much unused ground to build sideways on. There would also be vast engineering constructs which would be apparent to us. This is the great Arecibo radio telescope in Puerto Rico, about which we will say more in a subsequent lecture. And now here is a candidate dominant organism on the planet. Each of these is a creature which, for sake of definiteness, I will call an automobile. And here is a great horde of these intelligent organisms, all clustering together, perhaps for warmth, or perhaps it's an outdoor political rally, or maybe a religious revival meeting. And one can, in fact, see that much of North America and Europe is constructed for the sake of these little organisms. Great straightways which are designed for them, and special buildings to which they go at night in ones and twos. And occasionally one can see small automobiles, which are obviously the young. And at this point, we would assuredly think we had found the dominant organism. But if we looked closely, we would see that there were small parasites which would come in and out of the automobiles. And we would think that we were now into the microbiology of the organism, disease organisms, and we had made great progress, little imagining that the real dominant organism had yet to be found. We would be quite astonished by a picture such as this, in which there are great organisms, many tens of meters long. Every one of these little white things here is, in fact, a great whale. And this is a picture taken in the ocean. And then we would see places like this. This is a marvelous sand dune field. And in these great sand dunes, we would see strange creatures like these. And what could these be? Well, we would have the following kind of argument. We would say, look, in this place there are stilted lumps. There's lumps about that size connected to the ground by 4 stilts. And many of them stretching as far as we can see. Now, how do you make stilted lumps? Well, there are no weather ways to make it. There don't seem to be any geology ways to make it. Probably it's a biology way to make it. Not only that, things get rubbed down on the earth. There are sandstorms which rub things down, running water rub things down. And we could calculate that in a period of only a few thousand years, the stilts would all be rubbed away and the lumps should be on the ground. So these stilted lumps have been made in the last few thousand years. There's some machinery on the earth for making stilted lumps at least every few thousand years, maybe much faster. And I think we would have to deduce that that was due to biology, and perhaps these are the dominant organisms. Then we would look closer. Here is a set of interesting creatures which would then be gone about 2 minutes later. This is in fact a flock of flamingos. And if we now look at another picture, here we have for the first time the organisms that we truly know to be the dominant organism, human beings. This is a great outdoor swimming pool. Each dot is a dominant organism. And nearby there are blankets, and on each blanket there are 1 or 2 dominant organisms. But to see what the dominant organisms are really like, we would have to go still closer. And if we really did that, we would finally...
And a limit is something you approach, but you never actually get there. Now, what the 19th century mythology did was to think of all things towards the limit called matter. It said, in effect, there is this dead material stuff. It is energetic, but the energy is unintelligent. It's a kind of roaring mechanical energy like fire or electricity or so on. It is not intelligent. And everything is really that. What we call human intelligence and consciousness are merely complicated forms of this primordial energy. And they are nothing but that. In the same way, we are evolved from lower orders of animals. And I can trace my ancestry to a protoplasmal globule, Pooh-Bah says. And, that's what you really are. You're only a complicated protoplasmal globule. Now, do you see the intent behind this mythology? The intent is to deprecate. The intent is, as we say now, to put down the human being, because the human being felt that hitherto he had been put up too far in the wrong way. You are a child of God, and the Lord loves you very dearly, but, that's just insufferable, to be put up in that way. You have an immortal soul. Your life is endless, but it can very well turn out to be a life of endless agony when you fry in hell. And that was a very serious threat to both Protestants and Catholics. And so it's much better, much more comfortable to have a dead universe than a living universe so everlastingly threatening. So then, the mythology of the 19th century, under which most of us still operate, because we operate under it because it has become so plausible. The science out of which this mythology arose has been so effective. It has produced such a marvelous splash of technological marvels that its point of view, or the point of view of those scientists who started the whole thing going, has become amazingly persuasive and convincing. After all, if I can reach into your brain with a very, very subtle instrument, and I can poke about inside and press there, and suddenly, on a certain point when I press it, a world of memory comes to life so vividly that you see it before your very eyes. I remove the instrument, it vanishes. I touch another place. You experience intense pleasure, absolutely unbelievable pleasure. I remove it, the sensation vanishes. Every time I touch inside, you get a sensation externally of intense reality. And I say, after all, I was only just pushing things in your brain. You see what a push-button thing you are? That's it. I can just poke around and you can see anything. But all that's happening is I'm putting a little electrode or something on certain parts of your brain. That's all you are, poor fish. You're just that kind of a sensitive sponge inside your head bone. Well, that gets very persuasive, you see. And people are therefore in a position, they are prejudiced to favor a mythology that will make out that you are, after all, nothing but something or other. Nothing but a kind of complicated neurological jello. And that point of view, as I...
Message M2, okay, their output under the application of the hash function should not be the same. You would never have smaller number of possible digest values. But aside from that consideration, it should be hard. It should take quite long, astronomically long time to find two distinct messages. Now, the third thing I want to point out is that we might want also in the context of the hash function to be able to hide information about the particular properties, and first of all, they are interrelated. For example, if you have a situation where the outputs, let's say, really appear to bear no relationship to the input, and the outputs also look random, then that'll in fact give you, to a large degree, a lot of the collision resistance properties, because just the fact that you can't predict the output and the fact that it hides all this information implies that it's going to be hard to find two inputs that are distinct that map to the same output. And so sometimes you get one property in exchange for the others. Now the second thing I want to point out is that typically these properties in practice, or maybe even in the underlying mathematics, are things that you hope for, but you can't always guarantee that they'll always hold. And it may be entirely possible that you could design a hash function that you think is completely collision resistant, but someone might come along a year from now and come up with a more clever way for finding a collision. Maybe they'll find a clever shortcut that does not involve doing a brute force search of any sort. Okay, and it turns out that cryptographers, for better or worse, currently do not have any mathematical techniques. They haven't developed techniques for being able to work around some of these limitations. And so we often do take it on face value that these schemes are secure based on how long they've been around. Okay? Now I also want to point out, and the last thing I want to point out, is that this treatment that I've given is not meant to be mathematically rigorous by any stretch of the imagination. There are far more precise ways to describe these underlying properties. But my hope instead is that this video gives you maybe a bit of a flavor for what is required of a cryptographic hash function without maybe getting bogged down in some of the mathematical minutiae and formalism.
When you discover this, you can become what's called a pratyeka Buddha. That means a private Buddha who doesn't tell anything. Or you can become a bodhisattva. A pratyeka Buddha goes off into his ecstasy and never is seen again. Bodhisattva is one who comes back and appears in the everyday world and plays the game of the everyday world by the rules of the everyday world. But he brings with him upaya. He brings with him some way of showing that he's been on the journey, that he's come back, and he's going to let you in on the secret too. If you will play it cool, and also come back to join in the everyday life of everyday people. Because this is the rule. If the world is dramatic, if the world, as the Hindus say, is a big act put on by the divine self, one of the rules of coming on stage is that you don't come on as yourself. You come on as the part of the play. It's very bad form if an actor always acts the same way. That's what's called a star, as distinct from an actor. actor can become anything. And so, but in private life, well, he's just Mr. Jones. But he doesn't come on the stage that way. So in the same way, if you know that behind the scenes, in the depths, fundamentally, you are it, you don't come on that way. It always comes on as something else. That's the rule of the stage. Because without that, there wouldn't be a play. It would only be reality. No illusion. And the whole point of life is illusion. From the word Latin ludere, play. Showbiz. The show must go on, so don't give it away. But the truth has a way of leaking. It gets out. But then the important thing is, you see, when the truth gets out, those who catch hold of it must find a way of staying in contact with what society calls reality. That is to say, if you have a radio, you don't only need an antenna, you also need ground. So what happens in the world of mysticism, of psychedelic visions and so on, needs to be grounded. So then there are always two directions in which such a discipline works. One, paradigm. In other words, those who taught disciplines for awakening in the Orient were always careful to screen, first of all to screen those who applied, and then after screening them, to make them sensible, so that they knew how to handle the game of ordinary human existence and play it by the ordinary human rules. In other words, that they had strength of character and were not the sort of people who would be wiped out because they had no strength of character by an overwhelming experience. Then they let them in. But there are certain disciplines, such as Zen, where you get into the essential secret very early on in the discipline. And after that, they are concerned with much more training in showing you how to use it, how to use the power, to use the vision which you have acquired. And so it is with the current, what we will call LSD scene, that is raging